Frank Sinatra and the Beach Boys would seem like an odd match. The closest the chairman of the board ever came to covering a Beach Boys song was when Bruce Johnston wrote I Write the Songs for Barry Manilow, and Sinatra performed it, changing the lyrics to I Sing the Songs. And yet, in 1977, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys began composing a number of songs with Old Blue Eyes in mind. He even enlisted the help of arranger Dick Reynolds, who had worked with both Sinatra and Brian's heroes, the Four Freshmen. After several songs in the big band tradition had been recorded, Brian cobbled together a few traditional-sounding Beach Boys cuts, along with some outtakes from the vault, and presented it to his label, Warner Reprise, as the next Beach Boys album, one called Adult Child. Incidentally, Reprise Records was also the record label that Sinatra himself had founded back in 1960. Well, like anything else, the songs have leaked out over the years, and a few have even been officially released. Joining us to provide some insight into this lost Beach Boys album is David Beard, editor of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine and a friend of the show. David, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You know, I think for this discussion, we're going to do something a little unusual. Normally, when we do these album reviews, we talk about every song, but only play 3 or 4 cuts in their entirety. In this case, we're going to be talking about an album that was never released, and I have to assume that the vast majority of the audience has never heard this material. So this time, we're going to, at the very least, play snippets of each track as we go along through the album. So, David, can you give us some idea of what Brian had in mind for this group of songs?
I'll try. The first time that Dr. Eugene Landy was hired and brought into Brian Wilson's life was in the mid-'70s. And at that time, Landy had his therapeutic focus and was able to help Brian record and produce what eventually became the Beach Boys' Love You album. He was able to keep pushing Brian and to help him get it out. And you can kind of hear on the Love You album, a lot of the recordings are kind of therapeutic with their direction. None of the tracks are quite as dynamic as what they had done in the 60s or on Sunflower. And what's unique about this unreleased Adult Child album is Brian, and I don't know off the top of my head, I can't remember in my mind's eye how exactly Dick Reynolds got involved again, and Dick had been somebody that Brian worked with on the well-known and highly celebrated Beach Boys Christmas album from 1964. Dick did all the traditional arrangements on those, the standards that the Beach Boys covered as a group. What you hear on the Adult Child album that you don't hear on Love You is an attempt to go big band, as an attempt to create and record something that, it's my understanding that a couple of these recordings were intended with Frank Sinatra in mind.
Right. These are more ambitious recordings, actually, than Love You.
In that regard, yes. In putting the big strings going big band, very ambitious in that he wanted to create, as opposed to just doing standards, he wanted to create his own.
Right.
And I say this, and I say it carefully, because I wasn't there, but Landy at that time was let go. I don't know if he was fired. I don't know what the circumstances were, but I do believe that they felt that Brian was in good enough health that they no longer needed the services of Dr. Landy. And so Landy exited the situation. It was no longer in the picture. And this is right before Adult Child began. And depending on who you talk to, I think the common thread is, well, Adult Child just wasn't meant to be. But there may be a few who would maybe say, well, if Landy had still been around, that maybe it would have gotten completed. I don't know. I kind of feel like that's stretching it a little bit. Brian, by this time in his life, we know from seeing the Love and Mercy film, we know that this was a man who was in his mid-30s, struggling with addiction and mental illness, and on some level, these songs are tragic.
Well, let's start going through the proposed track listing of the Beach Boys' unreleased Adult Child album. And as I mentioned before, in some cases, we're not going to play the entire song, just a snippet of a song. And we begin with track 1. This might be the only swing number that extols the virtues of physical fitness I've ever heard. It's Life is for the Living. So I think the issue here with this song is not so much the music, which is certainly a peppy tune with a lot of brass, but it's what the song's about that would have been a problem.
These lyrics, life is for the living, don't sit around on your ass, smoking grass, that stuff went out a long time ago. Frank would have just went, next.
Yeah, exactly. Although I think we should point out that by the late 1960s, Sinatra was recording songs by popular songwriters like Jimmy Webb, and he would later cover Stevie Wonder's You Are the Sunshine of My Life.
Yeah.
Paul McCartney submitted a song to Frank Sinatra, which Sinatra rejected. So it wasn't out of the ordinary for a pop artist like Brian Wilson to try to write a song for Sinatra.
Not at all, and that's why when you start this type of project, you're thinking, good idea, 1 for 1, big band, 2 for 2, work with Dick Reynolds, the guy I did the Beach Boys Christmas album with, 3 for 3. It all made sense upon inception. It was a good idea. What's the cliche? It was a good idea at the time.
Right. Well, with the next cut on the unreleased Adult Child album, we're back in familiar-sounding Beach Boys territory. It's a song called Hey Little Tomboy. I've always liked this song.
Yeah, I always like the pleasant, fun aspect of this recording, in that it's a playful recording, but it is weird because here's a guy in his mid-30s singing to what sounds like a young girl.
Well, let me mount my defense of Hey Little Tomboy. I think in cases like this, the Beach Boys are writing in character. Like Spring Vacation on That's Why God Made the Radio. Those guys are not looking forward to going down to Daytona on spring vacation. I think they're writing from the perspective of a younger person.
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's like we're the Beach Boys, so we're going to write as if we're the Beach Boys.
Right.
So, yes. So it's one of those things where they show up and they put the Beach Boy hat on and
right.
They go to work and they're writing in that genre. They're writing to their legacy. They're kind of almost writing backwards in time.
Yes, yep.
To who they know they are based on what they've done.
Right.
They don't think anything creepy or anything otherwise. It's just a lyric, just like something they would have written. Don't hurt my little sister. Hey, little tomboy, come sit here on my lap. I got things I want to tell you.
Right. All dressed up for school too.
Yeah. So I think on some level it's that same. Oddly, even though it's a good decade later, it's just, to them, it was just a playful song.
That song, Hey Little Tomboy, would eventually wind up on the Beach Boys' 1978 album, MIU, minus a spoken word bridge, which was probably a good idea. We're talking with Endless Summer Quarterly's David Beard about the unreleased Adult Child album of 1977. And up next, the big band and the strings are back, but this time it's a cover of the old standard Deep Purple. And this song has special significance for Brian. That's
one of the songs he always cites as remembering he's in a crib or he's 4 years old or so. I don't know what the situation, but he remembers that being a song that he heard at a very early age, not unlike what we get to hear on Brian and Wilson's Reimagines Gershwin album from 2010.
Yep.
We're hearing a guy directly connected to something that means something to him. We know that his life is music, but when you're hearing Brian connect in music, there's no getting around the moment because you can hear it coming out of him. And it may be a little bit more raw in the sense of Deep Purple because it was never fully produced.
Right.
But it is as important, I'm sure, in his mind as any other recording he's ever done in his entire career.
And up next, we have the song Help Is on the Way, which was one of those outtakes from, I guess, around 1970 or so. A song inspired by Brian's ownership of a health food store. And I think the Beach Boys cornered the market on songs about being overweight and physical fitness.
Yeah, and if only they could have, all of them followed their own guidelines.
Yeah.
But hey, that's the life of a rock star, right?
Yeah, I suppose so.
It's a neat song. If you really want to hear a good version of the song, this would be something that I would tell the listener to, make sure that they got the original 1993 Good Vibrations box set.
Yes.
Because that does appear there, and I associate more directly with the Sunflower era.
So do I, yeah. The mention of the Radiant Radish at the end in that version, yeah. Help Is on the Way might also be the only rock song I know of that mentions enemas in its lyrics. We're back to the big band stuff, and this song, It's Over Now, directly references Frank Sinatra in the lyrics. And if Sinatra were going to record any song from this batch, I think it would be this one.
Well, it certainly is kind of a companion to the self-evaluation process that Brian allows during the writing, composition, arrangement, and recording process. But this is more terminal. If Frank Sinatra actually heard it, I would think that he would be kind of turned off by it.
Well, then again, Sinatra would record these albums like No One Cares and Only the Lonely and Where Are You, these mournful saloon songs. And I could see him, occasionally doing a track like this.
Yeah, that's true.
We're on the last song of side one, a track called Everybody Wants to Live.
Yeah, this is a pretty raw one.
Yeah.
A lot of it just sounds like guide vocal to me, so I can hear where it's going, and for that reason, I've always felt like it has promise, but again, not fully realized.
I don't have anything else to add to that, really. I'm sorry.
Sorry. It's a work in progress.
Yeah. So let's turn the record over to, oh my God. We turn the record over to, I guess we can talk about it for a second or so, but we mentioned Deep Purple being one of Brian's favorite songs. Brian and Daffy Duck have this one in common, Short and Bread.
Short and Bread eventually materialized on the L.A. Light album in '79.
Right.
To me, Shortening Bread is Brian just kind of sitting down and recording himself, just kind of exercising, because the riff in Shortening Bread is not unlike Boogie Woogie. When he sits down at the piano, that's kind of his muscle memory go-to thing to kind of unwind and to get wherever he's trying to go.
Right.
If he's stuck, I know this, so when he would sit down, if he got stuck, he would just Boogie Woogie until he got to where he was trying to go, and that's kind of his go-to noodle song, and it kind of sounds like it.
Yeah. And next up, we have a song called Lines. This is one of those songs where you really have to be a hardcore Brian Wilson fan, because he has a number of these slice of life songs. Brian will write songs about things that people take for granted. Here we have a song about standing in line waiting to go into a movie theater. Not
unlike Busy Doing Nothing.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more primitive, though. But again, this sounds more like a musical exercise than a lyrical exercise. This recording is just kind of a jaunty beat, dun 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 dun. It's kind of Brian just kind of working himself out again, and the lyrics, lines around the block,
right.
Lines. It's not a important Brian Wilson recording in that it's not something where Brian's trying to say, this is a new statement for me. This was a song in development. But again, fully realized, this might be one of those songs where strings are brought in, horns are brought in to accentuate the way that Walking Around the Block feels.
Right.
not fully realized, not taken to that level, we're left with just a kind of a loosely concocted idea.
Well, from that, we move on to something that's a little more fully realized, the Beach Boys' unreleased version of On Broadway.
Yeah, this is a highlight.
Yeah.
Again, it's not complete, but boy, is it close. And the natural thing is, if you're listening to something that's incomplete, you hear where it's, like all these tracks, you hear where it's going, you hear the promise of the recording, and you're like, wow. So I would have loved to have had a Beach Boys big band single and
right.
had like Deep Purple with On Broadway,
yep.
and it would have been crazy cool.
Yeah. Then we move on to Games Two Can Play, inspired by the Joe South song Games People Play. This is another one from, 68 initially? Yeah,
the late 60s.
Yeah.
And again, viewed and looked at as a part of the proposed, I think, part of Landlocked and then part of Sunflower initially. These songs were interesting, and they had Steve Desper working with them back then. That should have been a single. I feel like these were tagged on as a, hey, record label, here you go. Right. And that's because Brian lost interest. So, I mean, that's really important to understand. I can't emphasize that enough. Had Brian not lost interest, we would have had more recordings,
right,
like the ones he had been working on. And this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Brian being somebody who suffered from mental illness or had Dr. Landy in his life or any of that. They just weren't fans of record labels.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, and that's the number one thing here at play. They did not have the greatest experience with Capitol Records back in the 60s and, involved in a lawsuit with them. Then they leave that label, and then they go to a new one, and that label has expectations. But by that time, Brian just was not a fan of the business of music. I think that to a degree it might be okay to say that aspect of the music business beat him up enough that played a heavy role in him retreating from the scene.
We're talking with David Beard, editor of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine, about the Beach Boys' unreleased Adult Child album from 1977. And up next on the record, it's Brian Wilson's Ode to Baseball. We'll hear a little snippet of It's Trying to Say, with Dennis Wilson making his lead vocal appearance on this album.
For me personally, it kind of goes along, and it's just an okay song, but when it gets to the baseball is on, and knowing a little bit of that history about Brian, back in high school, he was either going to go and work on music or he was going to go try out for the Yankees because he was such a fan of Mickey Mantle's. To hear this song is cute. It's a fun recording. And when I hear this recording around the same period, not at that time, but not long after, the group recorded the song Our Team. And so you have two sports-oriented songs that are more pop than they are big band. They're not even pop. They're just peculiar. But they're Beach Boys peculiar, and it would have made a great single. Our Team,
right,
like the A side, and then Baseball is On,
right,
is the B side, or vice versa. It wouldn't have mattered. But I don't know how well it would have done on the charts, but I think it would have been a pretty interesting release.
Yeah. And that, of course, brings us to the final track on this album, Adult Child, and it's a song intended for Frank Sinatra, although if Sinatra were to record it, and this does sound like the kind of song Sinatra would have done in 1977, it would have needed a lyric rewrite because it's so personal and so raw, and it's so Brian Wilson. It just basically describes his state of mind at that moment in his life. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm talking about the song Still I Dream of It.
Yeah, this is, to me, it's almost like mid-career swan song, but not, because when you pair it with some of these other recordings and the tragedy within those and his struggle with mental illness, there's this hope at the end of the tunnel type of thing. But at the same time, it also has a little bit of finality to it. But like much of Brian's material, regardless of where it appears, whether it appears as a Glenn Campbell single, Guess I'm Dumb, or as a Beach Boy recording, Still I Dream of It is one of those recordings, much like Till I Die. In the back of my mind, She Knows Me So Well, Caroline No.
Right.
I just wasn't made for these times. The list goes on and on and on. That this guy, everybody wants to live. Life is for the living. Help is on its way. I mean, same guy. And although I hate to say this out loud, I mean, I really, he by being a Beach Boy, he was pulled out of the world of wanting to become Brian Wilson, the producer.
Right.
He went on and he recorded and he produced for the Beach Boys. And thank God he did, because those voices, man,
yeah.
Why wouldn't you? But I think the bigger picture here of the adult child music and Brian Wilson as a recording artist in general, if we get anything out of this discussion, is that Brian was just producing he was going through another phase in his life, producing another style, looking at music a different way, trying to find a different way to communicate what Brian was feeling and how he wanted to express it through his muse. And again, unfortunately, he lost interest.
So the big band project falls to the wayside. As far as I know, the songs intended for Sinatra were never submitted to him. Brian rounds out the proposed album, with some standard Beach Boys sounding songs and then some leftovers from the past. And what happens next?
I feel pretty certain that the Warner Brothers people at the time, who were placed in charge of hearing what was being worked on, had heard it and were like, well, these are, don't know about this. And
right.
It was questioned, and then it was played for the band members. I understand perfectly why the entire group rejected this collection. Dennis and Carl participated on these demos, but I think from Carl's perspective, I've always kind of felt like it was, I want to help my big brother.
Right.
Dennis was recording his own album at the time, which eventually became Pacific Ocean Blue, and was released very close to the same time that Love You was.
Right.
And many people, and I also feel this way, say that the Pacific Ocean Blue should have been the Beach Boy album of '77. And when you listen to Pacific Ocean Blue and how incredibly emotional and deep that album is, to have all the Beach Boys voices on that album would have been pretty astounding.
Well, to wrap up our discussion of the Adult Child album, I want to play Brian's home demo of the song we've been talking about, Still I Dream of It, and then segue into the finished studio demo of that song. Listen to this. The album we've been talking about, Adult Child, is the focus of the latest issue of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine. And as we always do in these conversations, we have to talk a little bit about what's coming up and happening around Endless Summer Quarterly magazine. Well,
we've had this lovely discussion about the Adult Child album, but I think it's important to mention that the author of the article within the issue, the fall 2015 edition of Endless Summer Quarterly, is Beach Boys historian Peter Riem. Peter had met Brian at that time. Peter writes from a very fascinating perspective, understanding kind of the psychological analytics of some of this material in ways that you and I don't know if we properly expressed.
Right.
And so it brings a different kind of richness to that history and that period of Brian's life. The other elements of that are of the 20-year history of the documentary I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, Don Was, and then the interviews with Don Was, Al Jardine, Blondie Chaplin, Matt Jardine, and Kenny Aronoff about the No Peer Pressure album.
Right.
Pretty cool. The next issue of ESQ, I've already almost completed it. So, but something has happened in Beach Boys' world that I just wanted to touch on that is kind of tragic, and that is the passing of Tricia Campo. I don't feel like I'm going to do her justice, but except to say that she was integral in helping oversee the Dennis Wilson recording sessions for Pacific Ocean Blue.
Right.
She kind of managed Brother Studios back then, and very integral in helping them through some very difficult times. And in recent years, worked for Al Jardine took most of the photos for his A Postcard from California release. She was there the day that Brian went out to, Big Sur and sang around the mic with Al, Matt, and Adam, and she took those pictures. And they were great pictures. She passed recently from cancer, and I had no idea. And so I really want to do something really important and special for her in her memory. But I don't think we're going to see that until the spring 2016 edition of Endless Summer Quarterly, because of the amount of work that I've already done for the upcoming winter 2015 edition of ESQ, and which is going to be primarily based on, like, over 3/4 of the issue is going to be one feature, and it's going to tell the story, and I hope as accurately as possible, because I'm working directly with Andy Paley. We've been talking about a lot of unfinished work, and if anybody knows anything about unfinished work with Brian Wilson, it's Andy Paley. They did a lot of work together, beginning in '87 to help him work on his first solo self-titled album. But the list doesn't stop there. It kind of begins there, and they just worked and worked and worked together, and then they co-wrote the material that the Beach Boys came in and recorded in '95. The Don Was produced Soul Searchin' and You're Still a Mystery, which brought the Beach Boys together again in the mid-'90s. And Andy Paley co-wrote that material. And there's a lot of really interesting songs, that were not even as far along as the material on Adult Child. But what you can hear in the Andy Paley sessions, and a lot of it's been bootlegged, and there's also a lot of it that's not been. And having sat down and revisited these recordings and spoken to Andy, we've spoken 4 times, and we're still talking because we really want to get this story told. What I hear in these recordings, this is a situation where this guy, Andy Paley, is able to bring the motivation out of Brian, where Brian's interested, he's interacting, he's involved, he's, for lack of a better term, on fire.
Right.
But it's just weird, the circumstances, why something does happen and why something doesn't happen. And in the world of creativity, and in this particular situation, we're talking about music creativity. You're talking about 2 guys who got together and over the course of a decade recorded over 40 songs together. That's not sitting still.
No.
That's a major output.
What's the status of the giveaways?
The long and short of it is we got a lot of stuff that people will be blown away that we're giving it away for nothing. And so they're thinking, okay, so what's the catch? Well, there is a catch, and here it is. You need to subscribe to the magazine. We'll be announcing the first winner. Will not be a grand prize package. It'll be one of our additional prize packages. We've got a Wrecking Crew prize package. We've got a Carl Wilson prize package, which has the new book, both of the Carl Wilson CDs, the Like a Brother CD, and Beach, because Carl produced it, plus the Wilson Brothers issue, plus the Carl Wilson Under God ESQ issue with the tribute CD. That'll be one of the first prize packages that'll go out. We have a Dennis Wilson prize package. We got all sorts of stuff like that we're giving away. But if you want to know more about what these prize packages represent, just go to the Facebook Endless Summer Quarterly Facebook page. And you'll see, in addition to the other posts that we put up there, if we're sharing stuff from Brian's thing or Mike Love's thing or Al's thing or Blondie's or whoever, or David Marks, and we tend to share whatever they're posting so that fans will be drawn to their pages and to follow their activities, which they probably already do. The first prize package won't go out until November 14th, I don't think.
Okay.
I think November 14th is what we're looking at in terms of the first announcement.
Right.
So as long as somebody anybody who subscribes by that time will be in the running. And if they don't get selected in time for that first prize package, there's like 6 more coming after that. So it's not like there's a shortage. And if you want to see what these prize packages consist of, again, go out to the Facebook page of Endless Summer Quarterly, like us if you haven't already, and just check out these prize packages we're giving away.
David, it's always a pleasure having you on for these discussions every few months, but as you know, very soon there's going to be an archival release from the Beach Boys, The Beach Boys Party, Uncovered and Unplugged, a 2-disc set filled with unreleased songs, and, well, we should have a conversation about that, too.
In less than 1 month, I think we'll be having that conversation.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking forward to that. David, take care of yourself and have a great rest of your day.